Hey, readers and writers, I'm Adrian Buskey, and this is Fictitious, a show about the storytelling craft of science fiction and fantasy. In this episode, I'm joined by T. Frohock, author of the Los Nefilim series. This historical dark fantasy series, set first in 1930s Europe, started with the novellas In Midnight Silence, Without Light or Guide, and The Second Death, all of which have been collected into the Los Nefilim omnibus. The series continues with the full-length novels Where Oblivion Lives and Carved from Stone and Dream, and the saga concludes in the World War II era with A Song with Teeth, which is out now from Harper Voyager. Teresa, welcome to Fictitious.
Oh, thank you. So nice to be here.
This series has been going on for quite a while now. This is 3 novellas, 3 novels. You've been on this for quite a bit. I'm always curious for authors when they've reached the end of something that's gone on this long. How does that feel at the end of that writing process, handing in that last book? Is there that sense of visceral relief of like, oh my gosh, I've got to the end of the marathon? Is there a sense of like letting your kids go, like you're watching them go off to college and they're finally moving out? Like, what's that like for you? What has that experience been like to finish it up?
I don't know, because it still feels like it's going on. One thing about the series is that it's concluded and that it has finished Diego's storyline. I love the characters and I love the world. And I think someday I may return to it a little more because I would like to carry on the story with Isabel and Raphael. I think the 3 fathers, their story is pretty much over and done with, but the kids have a whole nother story to tell. So it doesn't really feel like it's finished and stopped and ended, but at the same time, I'm letting it go so I can work on some other things in the meantime. I think more of a test for me. I want to make sure I can write something other than these 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 characters over and over again. It doesn't really feel like it's over yet.
Yeah, when you have something that's generational like that, and you do have younger characters in there, there is always that chance of going back. You can always revisit it.
Yeah, and I think they're all so unique and so interesting on their own levels. I even had some surprises from both Raphael and Isabel as I wound up A Song with Teeth, and I can't really go into them because they're spoilers, but at the same time, it gave me a different take on their personalities. They didn't quite go in the directions I thought they would go in, which was okay with me because it really, in the end, it just fit the story beautifully. So sometimes when I'm having anxiety or something, I don't know why, it's just telling myself stories like that tends to take away some of the anxiety for me, and I can kind of immerse myself back there, and it's a familiar world. So I play in it while I'm still working on other things.
A few months back, I had Leigh Bardugo on the show, and Leigh was talking about how that was a similar thing for her in going back to the world of like Six of Crows. And whenever she would return to that, it was like it was no problem to slip back into that mode with those characters and that place. And so there was a comfort there that she could take that writing other things, you know, she didn't have. So yeah, I totally get that. Like you said, this is a series. We don't want to spoil things for people because if they're first getting introduced to it, there's a lot to jump into here. How do you pitch the series as a whole? When people ask, oh, well, you're a writer, what do you write? How do you tell them about this series? What's your kind of overarching elevator pitch?
I personally would rather throw myself down an elevator shaft than give an elevator pitch. I hate them. Usually I tell them the series, if you like John Wick and you like gothic horror and you like historical fiction, you'll find what you like in the whole Los Nefilim series. It's secret societies operating just under the veneer of polite society, and they are like gangsters. And that's usually how I pitch it. I don't know, have you ever heard of the Shadow series from the 40s, I think 30s and 40s? It was a radio serial.
What evil lurks in the hearts of men, the shadow knows.
That's the one. testosterone. And a lot of people haven't heard of it, especially younger people. So I don't usually use that reference. But when I first started thinking about what I wanted to do with Los Nefilim, the shadow was the first thing that came to mind because, you have this suave, debonair guy and he's going around doing a little bit of the supernatural, but at the same time, he's solving mysteries. And so that's sort of what the whole series was patterned on, was that the Shadow series where you could kind of jump in at any point, but you have this cast of recurring characters. So it feels familiar, even though it's your first introduction to the story.
That is one thing I definitely wanted to hit on, was that the series is kind of talked about in a way where it's like you could jump into any one of the novellas, you could read any of the novels. Although I feel like if you go into A Song with Teeth as the concluding volume without any of the context for the others, you're going to be missing out on a lot of the continuity and the things that makes those characters special. But, like you said, it's kind of fashioned after 1930s pulp novels so that, there's an accessibility where you can hop right in, which I thought was very interesting. I mean, I think most people these days are people who are really excited about series, love when a series goes on quite a number of novels, because when they find something they like, they want to really dig into it. But there is something really nice about being able to just find something on the shelf and pluck it and be like, well, it doesn't matter what the number is, I can just get into it. And kind of unique, I think, in series stuff. We talked a little bit about the characters already, and I want to dig into them a lot more later on. But I think that we should specifically talk about A Song with Teeth, since that is the concluding volume of at least of Diego's story and this series proper, and it is the new book. So what can you tell us about this particular volume? And like you said, we've got gangsters who are also angels and demons, and the series that's had a lot of this, these kind of intrigues and investigations and things. But when we get to A Song with Teeth, this is now with the backdrop of World War II, with a lot of very big, bleak and dark and brutal themes involved. So, how do you prepare the audience for this particular novel?
My agent thought Carved from Stone and Dream was probably more horror, or the closest to horror of the novels. I personally found A Song with Teeth very difficult to write at times. As a matter of fact, one character does go to a concentration camp. And when I wrote the original draft, I wrote it in a very dreamlike voice, more to help me and the reader divorce themselves from the horror that was going on. And that particular version did not work well with my beta readers. It did not work well with my agent or my editor, or frankly, anybody who saw the early drafts. So I went back and I wrote it exactly as it would have happened. I had some great resources, and the Mauthausen Museum answered several questions for me so that I was able to have a very descriptive chapter. I had one reader say that she had a great deal of difficulty getting through that particular chapter. However, what I tried to do with all the books, and especially A Song with Teeth, is to imbue it with hope. Yeah, things are dark, things are terrible, things are bad, but it's that strength of both personal character that the characters have and the strength of their being together and how they nurture one another that gets them through it. And it was really difficult writing it, especially last year when I was going through and writing it, and everything that was going on in the United States politically at that time didn't help at all. I felt like I was just sinking into it, into the whole mentality of that period, especially when you have it going on all around you. And it was just extremely dark in places. And this one is. There's other places where I feel like the language was a little too flowery to capture the period appropriately. But, at some point you got to let it go. And I could not, because I was on a deadline, I just could not keep working it. And so I just finally said, that's it. It's just going to have to go the way it is. It was just a hard balance to strike throughout the whole novel. That's why I tried to put some humor in it. For the fans of the series, Guillermo's daughter, Isabel, finally meets her uncle, Geordie, who is not a good person. At the same time, they find they have a lot more in common than they thought. And it's not happy things. They're both very aggressive. They're both very determined people to land on top. But it made for some great humor between the two of them because she takes nothing off of no one, and he just is so amused by her. He just keeps feeding into it. But it was little moments like that kind of broke through some of the more sinister aspects of the novel. I think once people get past those first few chapters, they'll find that it's not as dark. To me, it's a period that you cannot write lightheartedly about. And I've spent so much time reading it. As a matter of fact, I revisited some books that I had not read for many years. One of them was, I believe it's Martin Gilbert, The Holocaust, which is just a litany of terrible things happening to people. But I tend to write more like a method actor acts. And in order to write the scenes, I kind of have to immerse myself in that period. It's really sometimes difficult to do. I'm not sure I would want to write another novel about that period, at least not anytime soon.
It's been really interesting over the last year or so talking with authors who have had stories that either were very prescient about some of the things that were coming up or dealt with themes that were related to it. But yeah, I mean, writing a story that takes place, that dealing with the Axis and the Allies, that deals with things like Nazis and the Holocaust and concentration camps in an era where there's a lot of people who want to pretend like the Holocaust didn't happen. A lot of other people who are essentially neo-Nazis and are looking to bring that kind of violent fascism right back to the current world. My father was a World War II veteran who fought in the theaters of Europe against the Nazis. I'm a late in life child, so it seems generationally out of step, but you know, my dad was quite a bit older. And so I grew up hearing about those things and his experiences in all of that. And there's a certain part of me that's kind of grateful that he passed away before some of these things came back around now, because I can't imagine him sitting in his 90s. My father passed away at 92, but I can't imagine him, you know, being into his late 90s and seeing all the things he fought against reoccur, because that was the defining thing of his generation, is that they went out and they defeated these people and then it all came back. But he spent most of my life and my teenage years on warning me about it returning. That was a thing that he would constantly say, and I was often thinking, okay, Dad, but you know, we've kind of moved on. And I was wrong. He was totally right that so many of these things are secular and do return. But can't imagine what it was like for you to immerse yourself in that in a time period where it all felt a little too on the surface again. But I appreciate what you were talking about there as far as the research and getting yourself tapped into all this. The series-wise, like I said earlier, it starts in the 1930s, and it starts in Spain, but it also reaches out into other places in Europe. Can you kind of give me a sense of, before it hits the latest novel, what this environment looks like? And then we can talk about the Los Nefilim and the angels and demons as well, because there's a lot to chew on here as far as that setting. So can you kind of just give us a greater sense of what the world looks like and how these characters fit into it?
The world, what I wanted was just real world, actual places, actual people. A lot of the people that I used in the novels and in the novellas were actual historical people. I usually keep those at arm's length. The fun part of writing these was to come up with the angels and their hierarchies, and the demons and their hierarchies, and the world building that went into it. What I did is I took the Solomon story. You've heard of Solomon the Wise. He had magic carpets, he had rings, and he was written about in Jewish history. Christians adopted him, and he shows up in Arabic text. I believe he shows up in the Quran. He was such a well-known figure, and he had all these magical abilities. And I thought, what if he was the son of an angel? And what if there was a whole bunch of priest kings and queens during that time period. And what if the demons were actually the old gods who were here on what I call in the books the mortal realm, this dimension, and the angels were like invaders from outer space, not in spaceships, but they came to another dimension. Because to me, it was like mashing up every mythology I have ever heard of into one gigantic ball, so to speak, one world, so that everything had a place. And then when the angels came, the demons went to war with them because they were invaders. And that it eventually culminated in the flood, when the angels opened up the heavens and the demons were forced to capitulate to the angels. And then how would they establish themselves? Because they've almost ruined the world, so they don't want to do it again. So they create children to fight in their name. That way it won't get out of hand again. They won't kill too many mortals. And that was sort of how all the world building originated. And what happened was I took an Old Testament class in college, and there were just so many stories there and so many different ways to spin those stories. And I started thinking, this is all really great. We can do this. And so what I did was I decided that the Nefilim, who are the sons and daughters of the angels, and the demons, who also have their own sons and daughters, they kind of keep apart, but at the same time, they interact in a lot of ways. It was more fun to do in modern times than to have it as a medieval thing, because in modern times I have like Christina and her club in parts of Barcelona where it's not safe to go. And I have Guillermo out, thinking he's doing everything noble and good. And really he's a gangster, but people without a second thought. And it was just so cool to have them all together, and they have all these magical abilities they don't dare use, because if they do, then the mortals will catch on to them. And if the mortals catch on to them, you have things like the Inquisition. You have mass massacres because they're looking for the witches or the demons, and they take out a lot of Nephilim. The more I thought about it and the more I built the world, it was just so easy to merge it into the real world and just kind of have the two running in tandem. And Spain is just beautiful. It's just a beautiful country. I loved it. But what happened was the characters were from another novel, and they were originally Spanish, and I was just being lazy. I didn't want to move them to another country and change their names, so I just left them Spanish. So I'm sorry. That was probably more of a mythology than you wanted.
No, that's great. I mean, because all that kind of thinking is the stuff that, people listening to the show, whether they're fans of the series and are liking getting a look into the back end of it, or they're writers who are inventing their own series, trying to figure out how to piece them together. That journey from figuring out, the influences to why things click into place the way they do, why an environment is what you want to do, or just this sense of taking elements that we know from our own mythologies, our world histories, our religions, things like that, and figuring out ways that you can find pieces that lock together. I think that's one of the most fun things for anybody who's mindful of, reading the research of just our histories and going, oh, here's this thing here and here's this. And if you put them together, something new happens, right? That's fun. Yeah. The idea of angels and demons completely separate from our normal kind of like religious backgrounds and then put into a semi-modern era where they're gangsters is a totally different and refreshing kind of setup. So that's very, very cool. You mentioned that they have a lot of abilities and stuff. I think if there's a trope at play in this series, it's what they call the masquerade, which is the idea of that there's a shadow world operating, just underneath the veneer of polite society. And in particular, like you said, that these are people who have Their bloodlines are angelic or demonic, and
Right.
they have abilities that they have to repress. And I think that always creates a sense of conflict, because anybody who has a talent typically wants to use that talent. It's, I think in any of us, it's like if there's something that like we're good at, we tend to want to use it.
Yes.
What are some of those abilities? And then we'll talk about Diego, because his particular background is unique amongst them and creates a whole other set of conflicts based around those abilities. But what are unique about the angels and demons? What can they do?
What I tried to do is I don't know if you've seen the it's a meme, and it shows this beautiful, beautiful cat with long hair and it's sitting there in a just pristine pose, and beside it someone else has taken a white cat and just put Google eyes all over the white cat, and it's like, the beautiful cat is how the Rafaettes or the pre-Rafaettes saw angels. And then the white cat with all the eyes is what angels really look like. So what I did is I had the Book of Enoch, I believe is what I used the most of. And what struck me about the descriptions, that the angels were such otherworldly, such strange looking creatures, that they were essentially a different species of supernatural being. So what I thought was, wouldn't it be cool if they had 3 sets of vocal cords when they take a mortal form? Because that's something else. There's different types of angels. There's all kinds of hierarchies of them. And one type looks very close to mortal or can change their form so that they are mortal. And they're called the Malachium. And that is primarily what you see in the Los Nefilim novels, or the ones who can survive on the mortal realm and can take the form of humans. Even so, they retain some of their angelic qualities, in that 3 sets of vocal cords is one of them. This enables them to produce all kinds of unusual sounds. When I think of angels singing, I think of, have you heard the sounds from space or seen some of the videos from some of this Hubblecraft and things like that, where they're playing sound? Okay, that's what I'm thinking of when I think of the angels singing. It's a very ethereal, very beautiful sound. So many tonal qualities that are involved in it. The demons, on the other hand, are more empathetic and more earthbound. They can move more among the mortals, but they feel much more deeply. I don't know if you've ever read any Locra or not, but he writes about something called duende, and it's almost like a Spanish spirit of loss and love and lust and all the things just rolled into one. It's like this giant emotion, and it's not like a muse at all. A muse sort of lands on your shoulder, but the duende seizes the artist and essentially pulls out the deepest, darkest part of them to, put on the page. And so when I think of the demons, I think of that. I think of duende. I think of that raw emotion that's inside of all of us. So that's the difference. And the beauty of Diego is he has that unique vocal range combined with the ability to draw emotion from other people in all kinds of ways. Think of somebody like Freddie Mercury. The way his vocal range was everywhere, and he could be anything. When you hear him sing, he just evokes so many emotions, whatever. I mean, he could just manipulate entire audiences with his voice. It was amazing. Annie Lennox is another one with that ability to combine form and voice. Lady Gaga, all of them. That kind of thing. That's what Diego is. He has that special magic. And then what people often focus on with the books, they focus on the music, but they completely forget the sigils, which are also involved in their magic. And what the sigil is just a magical symbol. They're able to take the tonal qualities of their voice, and they have almost like chromathesia. And so that they can take the tonal qualities, the vibrations that they see, and reshape them into a different form. So it's almost as much a form of dance as it is music. And this is why the older Nefilim are so much more dangerous than the younger ones, because the older ones have had years and centuries to perfect their movements so that they can do it like that. Whereas the younger Nephilim are like driving a car. They're still thinking about when to push the gas, when to hit the brakes, that kind of thing. And their control isn't as good. So that's one way. It's really fun to compare the two different age groups, the generations. The qualities that Diego has of both the angel and the demonic gives him the ability to both manipulate through his voice and through his movements. That's why a lot of times you'll see him perform more of a dance in the books. He and Raphael both tried to use language that was more conducive to dance than song when I was writing their scenes. Whereas with Guillermo and Isabel, I tend to focus more on the tonal qualities of their voices.
Well, you hit on something there that I think it's important to kind of extrapolate on, which is that so the core character of the series is Diego Alvarez, and his heritage as a person is that he is part demon, part angelic, and that is a rare thing, an exceedingly rare thing in this world that gives him access to both of those sets of abilities. But he is still a person living in this world and a person who has gone through unique challenges, has levels of PTSD. He is incredibly powerful, but also very vulnerable, which is something that the fan base has really responded to in a big way, that his particular version of masculinity is atypical of your like action hero star. So what more can you tell me about Diego as far as why that heritage makes him an outsider in both of his heritages, and then what it took to create this character who is this balance of power and vulnerability?
Well, I think with Diego, it's not so much his being half angel, half demon is what worries people. A lot of the story about Diego goes back to his firstborn life. As a matter of fact, it goes back with Guillermo, Mikel, and Diego when they lived as Solomon, Benaiah, and Asaph. And Diego was Asaph. It was a name that was in the Psalms. And I always kind of wondered who Asaph was and why was David's name there, Solomon's name there, and then Asaph's name is there, but there's no history about him. So I made up a story where Solomon and his general Benaiah were good friends, and Asaph was demon and angel, and they all were good friends for a while there. And then Solomon became overly arrogant and wanted Asaph and Benaiah to break up. And Asaph got mad and stole Solomon's ring and gave it to a demon. And that's how the Solomon story went, how I made it up. So I went with that. And the reason they don't trust him is because he betrayed Solomon. He took an oath to Solomon and then wound up betraying him. He let his anger get him in trouble. And his need for revenge. And meanwhile, Solomon, who is now Guillermo, realizes that he was very arrogant in his firstborn life and that he caused a problem that did not have to be. And Mikel has always kind of been torn between the two of them ever since their firstborn lives. But because Diego also lied to Mikel in their firstborn lives, that created some trust issues with them. And they sort of carry these things from one incarnation to another. And what eventually happens is the reason the angel-born don't trust Diego is because a lot of them remember him from their firstborn lives. And the reason the demons don't trust Diego is because Diego had a whole nother job in his firstborn life that I go into in a song with teeth, and he failed them. So he essentially, trying to get what he wanted, failed everyone else, and now no one trusts him. He's unique in that way. The part you talked about his vulnerability, but also being an action hero. But the reason is I wanted to move away from toxic masculinity. I wanted to move away from these, hey man, beat everybody up, no consequences, that sort of thing. For Diego, there's always consequences, and he's always very aware of them. And I think a lot of it is the empathy. Empathy is not a natural emotion for him. He has learned it. Mikhail has taught him. And because of that, he thinks more deeply about his actions and how they affect other people. And some people make like they've never seen anything like this before, but there's a lot of very well-drawn male characters out there that show that vulnerability. That's why everybody loves John Wick. I mean, stop and think about it. He's just got that magical, Keanu Reeves has this magical ability to project, gosh, I'm going to fight everybody in the room. But at the same time, there's something sweet about him. It's that same kind of personality, that same kind of individual that when pushed into a corner, yeah, he'll fight. But at the same time, if there's any way he can get around it, he will. Not out of cowardice, but just because he knows there's a better way. And Guillermo is kind of funny in the same way too, but he has his moments. Everyone likes to think he's this big tough guy, and he's a marshmallow. And it's just all of them are really more like the men that I know than sometimes the men I see projected on screen in movies or in books or whatever. So I wanted to kind of capture that and say, this is how people really are. And it's not all beat them up and shoot them up and run off into the sunset. There's a lot more about it and how it stays with you.
I like that you mentioned that, because if there's something that I think is under scrutiny in a lot of stories these days, it's the idea of the action hero who goes through exceptional trauma and then comes out the other end relatively unchanged and unscathed. And that's just not how we are as humans. We get profoundly changed by our scars. And in particular, there's, a way out there kind of comparison, but it was looking at like Iron Man 3, where that particular MCU movie was focused on Tony Stark and Iron Man's trauma over the things he'd experienced. And as a superhero narrative, we've seen it in comics, but we've not seen it really in a film before, to actually step back and be like, no, you've gone through some crazy stuff. It's going to affect you. It's going to change how you react, and it's going to alter all of your decision making. And clearly that's at play with these characters here. You mentioned a few people, and I want to touch on them just kind of briefly. You mentioned Mikhail, who is Diego's husband. There is Raphael, who is Diego's son, who is a very important character in the series, and another character named Isabel, alongside of Guillermo in there too. So I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on who each of them are, but if you can kind of give us a little bit of an overview of who these people are, how they relate to Diego, and where their place is in this story.
Okay, Guillermo is really the head of Los Nefilim, which is the Spanish division of the Inner Guard. And he and his wife, who is an actual angel, a literal angel, her name is Juanita, and she is Isabel's mother. And Juanita is always pushing for Isabel's to take her place more prominently as a leader of Los Nefilim. And they are one family unit. The other family unit is Diego, his husband Mikhail, and their son Raphael. And the reason I say their son Raphael is because Mikhail has essentially adopted Raphael as his own. Raphael sees them both as father figures and addresses Mikhail as father and Diego as papa. What I wanted to do was take these two family units, one conventional and one non-conventional with the guys, and show not their disparities, but how similar they are. And the way the reader sees that is there are several quiet moments in all three of novellas and the novels where you see them just going through normal family issues. They're worried about their children. Guillermo thinks Isabel is growing up way too fast and that she needs to experience being a child. And Diego is worried that Raphael isn't moving ahead fast enough. And they talk about these concerns with one another, and they talk about them with their children. And I think it's important because when sometimes when we look at war stories, we're only looking at single people. We're looking at people who have nothing essentially to lose, 9 times out of 10. When you're looking at war stories or even superhero movies, you know, here it is, this superhero, they've got nothing to lose. They are the only one. But when you've got a family to think about, when you've got a husband or a wife or someone you care about, especially children, I think one of the things that broke my heart was watching some of the Spanish films towards the end of the Spanish Civil War, when parents were putting their children on trains to either send them to Russia or Mexico. They were the only 2 places at that time that were taking refugees, knowing they may never see their child again. It was just heartbreaking to watch. And then you stop and you think, my God, you're in the middle of a war. You can't take an 11-year-old through the mountains like this. What are you going to do? Or 13, 14-year-old, what are you going to do? You're going to send them out of the country if you can. And that had to do with money. 9 times out of 10. More wealthy people were able to leave and they were able to get their children out. But anyway, going back to your question, these people around Diego, these are his support system. He is reminded of his responsibilities with Raphael. He does not want to be the kind of father to Raphael that his father was to him. Does not want that. So he's very conscious of wanting to be a good father. And he leans heavily on Mikel and also Guillermo. And that was the other thing I wanted to look at, was the relationship between Diego and Guillermo, which is a very tight friendship. And they nurture one another, not in the same way, of course, that Mikel does, but they're there for each other, usually in the toughest moments. And the reason I wanted to focus on that more than Diego and Mikel is because you kind of have that expectation that the spouse is going to be supportive and nurturing. But when you're getting that from a good friend, it feels just a little different. It feels a little less toxic. It's not a lot of banging each other on the back. It's what I've seen men do for other men that I know. They're there for them. They listen. They cry on each other's shoulders, sometimes literally, sometimes figuratively. So all these people all together, they're supporting one another. And that support shifts through the books. It doesn't stay the same. In the beginning, everybody's kind of holding Diego up. But by the time we get to A Song with Teeth, Diego's returning the favor and he's holding his friends up. So that's kind of a character change and a character arc that I'd wanted to do from the beginning with him. And I was really pleased to see how it all came out.
Well, having 3 novellas, 3 novels, that gives you a lot of space to explore and to actually, make those kind of developments, which is a really nice thing to be able to see. Thinking about the scale of that, all of these characters, all this development, and also all this historical stuff, I want to dig into just the nuts and bolts of your writing craft then, to kind of know how you're tracking all that stuff. What are you using to make sure that you've got consistency and continuity across these things? Just first off, are you an outliner? Are you a discovery writer? What's that methodology look like for you?
I don't like to classify that because I think a lot of people say, oh, I'm a pantser. Oh, I'm an outliner. And I think it's a little of both. I think everybody kind of does both. And that's me. I do both. I have a basic idea of how I want the story arc to go. From the first novella through the third novella. I knew exactly what I wanted from that story arc. And when Harper Voyager asked for the novels, and when I designed the proposal for the novels, I made sure that I continued the story arc that had began in the 3 novellas through the 3 books. So it's a story of growth for me. It's about people. And that's usually when I tend to do best with my writing, is when I'm writing about people. I'm not plotting all the time. What I'm thinking of is, this person needs to grow in this way. How can I move them in that direction? And then I'm also thinking too, what would make an exciting plot? Oh, a missing code book. Let's write around that. And then for the third book, I don't know, it just kind of wrote itself. It really did. I already knew what I wanted from it. I knew how I wanted to get from point A to point B. I had all the right events. It's just I had to rewrite a lot of the scenes and add a lot. And what I also wanted to do was add information from the novellas in such a way that it didn't sound like mansplaining what happened in books 1, 2, and 3, and getting that in organically so that it's entertaining at the same time as it is informative was really difficult. But I think I was able to if readers haven't read the novellas, they shouldn't be lost, because everything they need to know to see the plot come through is in that book. And I also did author's notes where I kind of recapped the previous books so that anybody who just reads that quick recap can be up to speed to where we are. We'll know who's who and what a Nephilim is and how they operate, and then can just dive right into the story. Because to me, that's the best part. That's what's important. So when I'm plotting, I'm thinking character arcs, and then I start plotting around those character arcs. I really do better if I write a synopsis, because I kind of work out a lot of dead ends that way by thinking things through. And then the book I'm working on now, which has nothing to do with Los Nefilim, it's been a little bit more difficult because I haven't hit that point where I really feel the characters yet. I'm getting there. I'm right on the edge of it, but I have to feel what they're thinking. And it's like I said, for me, that's the biggest thing. It's more of an immersive process of immersing myself in that person's head to know what their feelings are and what their desires are and what do they hate, what are they afraid of, and start working that into the story. So I like to think of it, it's like I sketch, almost like sketch a scene, and then keep going back in and filling in the details and adding the color and adding the movement and things like that until I finally get it to the point where I'm reasonably happy with it. I'm still editing everything.
What are you writing in? Because it sounds like there's a lot of note taking. There's a lot of research that was involved in these, like we were talking about earlier. What software are you using? Are you doing analog stuff beside it? How does that all work for you, just process wise?
Well, what I do is I use Word. When I was researching for the Los Nefilim novels, all of them, I felt like I was cramming for an exam on every single one of them. I wanted the details to be so right. Well, I had series sheets with all the names from the past lives. If you noticed, I stopped giving too many names for past lives as it went on, because it was getting really hard to keep up with who's who in this life and then that life. So I had to do a graph in Word. And what I did is I put it together, and I have notebooks. I have so many 3-ring binders of historical facts. I have a lot of history books. One thing that Beth Cato taught me to do, which was really great, because I hate marking up my books, because I never know what I need for one book isn't going to be what I need for another. So she taught me to take sticky notes and make on my own personal index, and then put the sticky note in on the front page. So that worked beautifully for me. So I do things like that. Most of the time, when I'm doing something with a lot of world building in it, like Los Nefilim and a lot of names and a lot of historical names, I will combine that into one document and keep it beside me. And I will also keep it on my computer so I can word search it when I need to. It's a lot. It's a lot to keep up with. I know some authors use wikis with some of their series. There was a couple of times if the learning curve had not been such that it would have created a hiccup in my meeting my deadline, I probably would have reverted to that. It was just getting to be a lot to remember. And then the dates of the events and how I was going to go through that. So, yeah, so I stick mostly with Word, and I do a lot from print just because that's the way my brain absorbs information the best, is from print.
I like it. You mentioned like the almost needing a wiki. I think if I remember correctly, it was quite a while back, but I think it was like Shannon Chakrabarty when she was on the show talked about how like her husband or her brother or somebody had built a wiki for her just to help her keep track of everything in those those big novels. And when you've got something of that kind of scale, it's like looking at like Stephen King's Dark Tower series where Robin Firth had to come in and basically write a compendium like just to cover everything that had happened in them so they could keep all the story stuff straight, and they still were correcting things into later versions. So it's a lot, especially on that scale. Like I said at the top, 6 books in this series, or 4 if you think about the compendium that collects the first novellas and then the 3 later ones. I have Where Oblivion Lives and Carved from Stone and Dream. I don't have a physical copy of there we go, A Song with Teeth. That's teamwork. And I like that the trade dress has some repeating elements, so you know them when you see them. That always makes me happy as a designer. Everything is out now, so everything is available. So anybody listening to this can go out and dive into this. And like we said, they could kind of jump in anywhere. Beyond that, where should people be following you online so they can learn about the next things you have coming out, dive deeper into this world through your own commentary and stuff on it? Like, where are you at in the online space?
I am mostly at my website at www.tfrohock.com. I spend a lot of time. I'm getting back into blogging again. I'm starting to enjoy that. And I'm also on Twitter, which is where I leave brain dropping several times a day. So you can see me there at tfrohock on Twitter. I'm not on Facebook very much, and Instagram, sometimes I show a cute picture of my cat who is here patiently awaiting her dinner. And that's pretty much it. I've kind of curbed some of my online time because I want to spend time writing.
I think that's a good call. I think the more time spent online is kind of damaging to us. During pandemic, we're stuck at home a lot more, and I feel like that has turned into a lot more online time. And definitely, it's got its good things. Obviously, it allows us to do things like this, but I think all of us could gain some good headspace by being a little more analog. Well, Teresa, thank you so much for joining me on the show. It was fun. I've been aware of these books for quite a while, and it's great to explore something that's so interesting like this. Like I said, Song with Teeth is out now. Everything else is out now. All the links to the website, to the books, all the purchase and stuff will be down in the show notes and everything, so people can get into it. And thank you so much for joining me on Fictitious.
Thank you so much.